Imagine leaving your home with no engine, no bicycle, no horse, no road, and no map. Everything you own is strapped to your back. Every mile must be earned one step at a time, and every journey carries the possibility that you may never return. A swollen river can end your trip. A mountain range can force you to turn back. A hungry predator can erase your footprints before the sun goes down. For your ancestors, travel wasn't a convenience. It was one of the greatest risks they faced. Now compare that to your morning. You climb into a car, board a train, or step onto a plane without giving the act of movement a second thought. Crossing a city takes minutes. Crossing an ocean takes hours. You can order a package from the opposite side of the world and watch its progress on your phone as it makes a journey that once would have taken months. Transportation has become so reliable, so fast, and so ordinary that most of us rarely stop to wonder how extraordinary it really is. Yet, for almost all of human history, there was only one way to get anywhere. You walked. For nearly 300,000 years, every migration, every hunt, every trade expedition, every family reunion, and every leap into the unknown happened at the speed of a human stride. Long before wheels rolled across roads or sails caught the wind, our species spread over continents using nothing more than the bodies evolution had given us. So how did humans go from walking across unfamiliar landscapes to mastering deserts, oceans, mountains, and eventually the skies themselves? How did a species with no claws, no wings, and no exceptional speed build a world where distance is barely an inconvenience? The answer isn't a single brilliant invention. It's a chain of remarkable breakthroughs, each solving a different problem, each building on the last, until the limits that once defined human existence slowly disappeared. Every highway, every cargo ship, every railway, and every aircraft can trace its story back to one simple act that our ancestors repeated millions of times, putting one foot in front of the other. For ancient humans, walking was the only option, so survival depended on doing one thing better than almost every other animal on Earth. We were never built to win races across short distances. A cheetah can reach speeds of around 70 miles per hour. Horses can gallop for miles at speeds that leave even elite athletes far behind. Against almost any large mammal, we seem remarkably slow. Yet judging human movement by speed misses the adaptation that mattered most. Evolution shaped our bodies for endurance instead of bursts of power. Rather than crossing a landscape in minutes, our ancestors crossed it day after day, season after season, eventually expanding into environments no human had ever seen before. The secret wasn't moving faster, it was moving longer. Look at your feet. Their curved arches aren't just there for balance. They act like natural springs, storing and releasing energy with every step, reducing the effort your muscles need to make. Running from one side of a room to the other doesn't seem remarkable, but over the course of 20 miles, those tiny energy savings become enormous. Every stride costs slightly less than it otherwise would, allowing humans to travel astonishing distances without exhausting themselves. The same principle appears throughout the body. The long Achilles tendon stretches and recoils like an elastic band, returning energy instead of wasting it. Along the back of your neck runs a strong ligament that helps stabilize your head as your body moves beneath it. Without it, every step would force your neck muscles to work much harder just to keep your eyes facing forward. These features may seem small in isolation, but together they transformed walking into one of the most efficient forms of movement found in any large mammal. Perhaps the greatest advantage, however, is something most people hardly notice until a hot summer day: sweat. Humans possess millions of sweat glands spread across almost the entire body. As sweat evaporates, it carries heat away, allowing us to remain active long after many other animals have been forced to stop and cool down. While a deer or antelope may outrun a person in a sprint, many mammals rely on panting to release heat, which becomes less effective while they're running. Humans can continue moving under the midday sun for hours, maintaining a steady pace while the landscape itself becomes an ally. This combination of endurance and cooling gave rise to an extraordinary hunting strategy known as persistence hunting. Instead of chasing prey in a single explosive burst, small groups of hunters simply kept following. An antelope could sprint away again and again, but every escape came at the cost of rising body temperature. Eventually, the exhausted animal would slow, while the humans, still walking or jogging steadily behind, continued their relentless pursuit. Victory came not from being stronger or faster, but from refusing to stop. Evidence of this remarkable adaptation reaches astonishingly far into the past. In 1978, paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey uncovered a trail of fossilized footprints at Lake Tolly. Preserved in volcanic ash for about 3.6 million years, the footprints belonged to ancient human relatives walking upright across the landscape. Their stride, foot shape, and balance are strikingly familiar, reminding us that the foundations of human travel were established millions of years before the first road, wheel, or sail ever existed. Those footsteps were more than footprints. They marked the beginning of humanity's first transportation technology, the human body itself. Long before engines or domesticated animals, our ancestors expanded across continents powered only by muscles, tendons, and remarkable endurance. Walking allowed humans to reach forests, grasslands, mountains, deserts, and eventually the edges of entire continents. But even the greatest walker eventually encounters a barrier that no amount of endurance alone can overcome. Because no matter how perfectly evolution prepared humans for life on land, there was one obstacle that humans simply couldn't walk across: water. Unlike mountains, water offered no obvious route around it. You couldn't simply climb over it or wait for it to disappear. Rivers divided hunting grounds, cut off migration routes, and isolated valuable resources on the opposite bank. To an early human, a fast-moving river wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a wall. At some point, however, that wall stopped being permanent. One of the most remarkable clues comes from the Indonesian island of Flores. Archaeologists have uncovered stone tools there dating back roughly 800,000 years. The discovery created an immediate mystery. Flores has never been connected to mainland Asia, even during the lowest sea levels of the ice ages. There has always been a gap of open water separating the island from the continent. That means ancient humans, or one of our close relatives, did something no land mammal was supposed to do. They crossed the sea intentionally. The boats themselves have long since disappeared. Wood rots, vines decay, bamboo leaves almost no trace after hundreds of thousands of years. But the tools remain, silently proving that someone made the journey. Perhaps it began with something incredibly simple: a fallen tree drifting across a river, a bundle of reeds tied together, an accidental discovery that floating could be controlled instead of feared. That realization changed the relationship between humans and water forever. Instead of seeing rivers and coastlines as the end of the journey, people began treating them as new pathways. Every successful crossing expanded the boundaries of the known world. The greatest demonstration of this confidence came around 65,000 years ago when modern humans reached Australia. Even during periods of lower sea levels, the voyage required crossing dozens of miles of open water. Australia was invisible from the departure point. There was no coastline on the horizon inviting travelers forward. Whoever made that crossing pushed away from land, knowing that, for a time, there would be nothing but water in every direction. Think about the mindset that required. It wasn't simply courage, it demanded planning, cooperation, and an extraordinary ability to imagine a destination that couldn't yet be seen. Before anyone paddled into the open sea, they first had to believe there was a reason to leave the safety of the shore. In many ways, the boat may have been humanity's first true transportation invention. Walking relied on the body that evolution had already provided. A raft or canoe was different. It was a tool created specifically to overcome a natural limitation. For the first time, humans weren't just adapting to their environment, they were redesigning it to suit their needs. Crossing water solved one of the greatest barriers our ancestors ever faced. But another challenge remained just as stubborn. Even after you could reach new lands, there was still one thing your own body could never do very well: carry enough. Survival didn't depend on how far you could travel. It depended on how much you could bring back. Imagine a successful hunt. After hours, perhaps even days of tracking an animal across the landscape, your group finally makes the kill. The celebration is brief, because now comes the real challenge. A large deer or wild horse can weigh several hundred pounds. Every pound left behind is food wasted, and every extra trip back to the carcass creates another opportunity for scavengers, or predators, to claim what you've earned. The human body has limits. Even a healthy adult can comfortably carry only around 40 to 60 pounds over long distances before exhaustion begins to take its toll. Beyond that, every additional pound slows you down, drains precious energy, and increases the risk of injury. Walking may have been an extraordinary way to move yourself across the world, but it was a poor way to transport everything that made life possible. So humans began finding ways to cheat. The simplest solution was dragging instead of carrying. Rather than lifting heavy loads onto their backs, our ancestors likely laid meat or supplies on animal hides and pulled them across the ground. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Archaeologists have found wear patterns on prehistoric hides consistent with repeated dragging, suggesting this simple technique was used long before written history. By spreading the weight across the ground instead of placing it entirely on the body, people could move far more than their muscles alone would allow. Eventually, that idea evolved into something even more efficient, the travois. Two long wooden poles were fastened together in a V shape, with a platform suspended between them. One end rested on the ground while the other was pulled by a person. Instead of dragging a loose bundle that constantly shifted and caught on rocks, the travois distributed weight more evenly, making surprisingly heavy loads much easier to transport over long distances. Very few prehistoric travois have survived because they were built almost entirely from wood, leather, and plant fibers. Those materials disappear quickly over thousands of years. Yet historians know the design was ancient because indigenous peoples across North America were still using travois when Europeans first arrived, preserving a technology whose origins likely stretched back thousands of years beyond the earliest written records. These inventions did more than make travel easier. They transformed what was worth carrying. Larger hunting expeditions became practical because more meat could be brought home. Camps could be supplied with heavier tools, larger quantities of firewood, and materials collected from distant locations. Transportation was no longer just about moving people. It had become the movement of resources, knowledge, and opportunity. But even the best tools still relied on human muscle. Every extra pound demanded more effort, every longer journey more energy. Eventually, our ancestors recognized an even more powerful solution. Instead of building better ways to pull heavy loads themselves, they could let another living creature do the pulling. And the first animal to join the journey wasn't the horse. It was the dog. Around 15,000 years ago, wolves began forming a unique relationship with human hunter-gatherers. Over generations, the boldest and least aggressive wolves evolved into the first domestic dogs. They guarded camps, helped locate game, and warned of approaching danger. But in colder regions, they gained another job just as important: transportation. Across the Arctic, teams of dogs pulled sleds loaded with food, tools, and shelter across frozen landscapes where wheeled vehicles would have been useless. A single dog could haul far more weight than a person could comfortably carry, and several working together could move an entire family's possessions. Suddenly, people were no longer limited to what they could strap onto their own backs. As useful as dogs were, they had limits. Humans needed an animal with greater strength, capable of traveling farther while carrying both cargo and people. That opportunity arrived on the vast grasslands of Central Asia. Around 5,500 years ago, the people of the bow tie culture achieved something revolutionary. Archaeologists studying their settlements discovered distinctive wear marks on horse teeth caused by bits placed in their mouths. Residues of mare's milk preserved inside pottery revealed these animals weren't simply hunted for food. They were managed, ridden, and woven into daily life. For the first time, humans had transformed one of nature's fastest land animals into a partner. The impact is difficult to overstate. For nearly 300,000 years, the practical speed of human travel had barely changed. Whether crossing a valley or an entire continent, people moved at roughly the pace of a brisk walk. A horse multiplied that speed several times over while also carrying supplies that would have exhausted a person. Journeys measured in weeks could now be completed in days. The world itself seemed to shrink. This wasn't simply about getting somewhere faster. Faster movement meant news could spread across greater distances before it became outdated. Traders could connect communities separated by hundreds of miles, exchanging goods, ideas, languages, and technologies. Entire networks of commerce emerged where isolated villages had once existed. Armies could appear with unprecedented speed, forcing societies to rethink defense, politics, and the control of territory. The scale of human civilization expanded because movement itself had expanded. Different environments inspired different partnerships. Donkeys became indispensable across the rocky landscapes and deserts of the ancient Near East, carrying loads that people never could. Camels transformed life in the Sahara and Arabian deserts, surviving journeys that would have been impossible for almost any other large animal. Reindeer hauled sleds across Arctic snowfields, while llamas carried supplies through the steep trails of the Andes. Everywhere humans settled, they looked for the local species best suited to the landscape and turned it into an ally. For the first time in history, transportation no longer depended solely on human endurance. It depended on cooperation, not only between people, but between entirely different species. Together, they built trade routes, connected distant cultures, and laid the foundations for kingdoms and empires. Yet, even the strongest animal couldn't solve every problem. Horses, camels, and donkeys still struggled over muddy ground, rocky terrain, and uneven paths while dragging or carrying heavy cargo. Humans had found powerful partners, but they still hadn't found the most efficient way to move a load across the land. At this point, you might expect the next breakthrough to be the invention everyone associates with transportation: the wheel. After all, it's often treated as the symbol of human progress. But history tells a very different story. Humans crossed oceans long before they rolled across roads. By the time the first wheel appeared, people had already reached Australia by sea. They had built boats, navigated coastlines, and domesticated horses. Entire communities were moving across continents with the help of animals, while the wheel, surprisingly, didn't yet exist. One of humanity's most famous inventions arrived remarkably late. The reason is simple. A wheel is only useful under the right conditions. A heavy wooden disc rolling over soft ground, rocks, tree roots, or deep mud is often less efficient than carrying a load on an animal's back. Before roads, a wheel solved fewer problems than most people imagine. Ironically, the wheel didn't begin as a transportation device at all. It likely started as the potter's wheel, a spinning platform used to shape clay into perfectly symmetrical vessels. At some point, someone recognized that the same principle could move heavy objects if the wheel were turned on its side and attached to an axle. The earliest known wheels, dating to about 5,200 years ago, were solid wooden discs. They were incredibly heavy, difficult to repair, and prone to getting stuck on rough terrain. They worked, but only in environments that were already relatively flat. Everything changed with the invention of the spoked wheel. By removing most of the unnecessary wood while preserving strength, engineers created a wheel that was dramatically lighter and faster. Chariots became practical, carts could carry larger loads over greater distances, and transportation entered an entirely new era. The wheel also created something even more important than vehicles: roads. As societies invested in smoother routes for wheeled traffic, movement became faster, safer, and more predictable. Roads connected farms to cities, cities to ports, and distant regions into organized trade networks. Goods, armies, messages, and ideas flowed farther than ever before. Boats had conquered water, animals had conquered distance. But the combination of wheels and roads transformed movement into a true transportation system, one capable of supporting the rise of the great civilizations that would shape the ancient world. Look back at the path our ancestors followed, and a pattern begins to emerge. Every breakthrough in transportation solved one specific problem that had once seemed impossible. Walking allowed humans to conquer land. Boats carried them across water. Simple tools helped them move more than their own bodies could bear. Domesticated animals multiplied their strength and speed. The wheel, combined with roads, connected entire civilizations. None of these inventions replaced the ones before them. Each became another layer in a story that had been unfolding for hundreds of thousands of years. That same story surrounds you today. Highways are simply roads refined over millennia. Cargo ships are descendants of the first uncertain rafts pushed into a river. Freight trains and trucks solve the same challenge as the ancient travois, moving more than one person can carry. Even the busiest airport on Earth exists because our ancestors first learned to leave familiar ground in search of something beyond the horizon. We often think of transportation as a collection of machines. In reality, it's a history of problems solved, one after another, by a species that refused to accept the limits of its environment. The next time you drive to work, board a flight, or have a package delivered to your door, Remember that every effortless journey rests upon countless difficult ones that came before. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, someone stood at the edge of the unknown, took a single step forward, and trusted that there was something worth finding beyond the horizon. In many ways, we're still following in those footsteps.